survivors reached the city. Rumors sprang up everywhere. A Confederate force is marching towards us. President Lincoln had dispatched bands of militia to avenge the slaughter in Baltimore. A state of emergency will be declared, and you must have a pass to walk the streets. Recounting events of April 18, 1861, Theodore Winthrop of the 6th New York Regiment remembered. As 5 o'clock approached, it seemed that all Washington had gathered at the station to pay homage to survivors from the Baltimore massacre. On the train headed for the city, Captain John Pickering of the 6th Massachusetts had heard and dismissed rumors that troops from Maryland and Virginia were marching toward it. Pickering had his hands full trying to make the wounded comfortable. Pickering's careful count showed that 4 dead had been left behind in the streets. Not counting bruises that did not break the skin, 31 men were wounded. Some were barely scratched, but others had serious bullet wounds. Acting under instructions from Pickering, unscathed men held back when the train stopped. Those wounded who could walk emerged to deafening cheers. Then the seriously wounded were borne out of improvised stretchers and laid on the cobblestones while officers inquired directions to the nearest hospital. Almost as one, assembled masses of civilian spectators gasped when the first stretcher emerged from the car. A few persons began screaming curses at the Confederates. Most persons stood as though frozen. Suddenly, a woman, barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, pushed through the front ranks. She darted to the side of the man whose stretcher had been unceremoniously deposited in the street. With her own handkerchiefs, Clara Barton tried clumsily to staunch the blood still seeping from the shattered leg. A hush fell over the crowd of spectators, according to Theodore Winthrop. Then, one by one, another woman stepped forward. Pulling out a handkerchief of her own, they followed the lead of the little clerk from the U.S. Patent Office. A native of Oxford, Massachusetts, Clara Barton later said that she simply couldn't bear the sight of a man from my own state bleeding to death before my own eyes. Youngest of 5 children and described as bold and willful, she became a teacher at age 15. After years of classroom experience, she launched her own free school in Bordentown, New Jersey. Soon it became so large that she had her first run-in with bureaucracy. Town fathers dusted off old ordinances and forced her to leave. The school supposedly was too big for a woman to manage. Not long afterward, at the age of 33, she went to Washington and applied for a government job. Shuffled from one department to another by clerks who didn't want to tell her that the government didn't employ women in white-collar jobs, she landed at the patent office. Someone pretended to give me a test, she said. When I produced a copperplate script as splendid as that from the hand of any male, he was astonished. I got the job and became the first white-collar female government worker in the nation's capital. At the patent office, the young woman from Massachusetts worked as a clerk. Hour after hour, she meticulously produced copies of official documents. Each completed document was carefully rolled, then tied with a piece of standard issue red tape. By 1861, she was drawing $1,400 a year, a salary high even by male standards. Within days after having rushed forward to bandage a wounded man whom persons in authority seemed to be neglecting, Clara Barton was reprimanded. She was spending entirely too Representatives. A few squads were temporarily housed in the White House. Once in the Representatives' Chamber, said Theodore Winthrop of the 6th New York, we washed. Some of our companies were marched upstairs into the galleries. The sofas were to be their beds. Most of us were bestowed in the amphitheater. Some 3,000 of us were quartered within the Capitol. The Massachusetts 8th were under the dome. No fear of want of air for them. The Massachusetts 6th were eloquent in their state in the Senate chamber. These and other men belonging to the militia units temporarily assigned to federal service took their oath of allegiance to the fighting forces of the United States on the afternoon of April 26. Until then, the North had had no soldiers other than the 16,367 officers and men who made up the entire United States Army. By the time militia members came under the formal authority of the U.S. government, Clara Barton was reveling in her self-discovered role. On April 19, she brought dainty food to the men of the 6th Massachusetts. Soon she came back with towels, handkerchiefs, and salves. Needles and thread followed, along with buttons. Incredibly, she managed to get her hands on a copy of the Worcester, Massachusetts Spy that was only 2 days old. Brandishing it triumphantly, Clara Barton strode to the vice president's desk and signaled for silence. Then she read the column after column of the newspaper to the boys from her home state. Soon she began placing her personal advertisements in the Spy. She called on all patriotic readers to send food, provisions, and medical supplies. When medical supplies began to accumulate, the prim little brown-eyed woman, whose friends said privately that she was subject to nervous breakdowns, began badgering the office of the Surgeon General. Colonel Daniel H. Rucker managed to arrange for her to transport her supplies through Army lines directly to the fighting fronts. At first, she rode in a big Army wagon, complete with a black driver. Soon she was handling the reins of 4 horses herself. Clara Barton's medical training, if it could be called that, consisted of 2 years' experience nursing an invalid relative. Yet she insisted upon taking to the front not only bandages and salve and lotions, but also lanterns so that surgeons could see to use scalpels and saws at night. 2 well-funded volunteer organizations for the aid of soldiers had already sprung up, both in New York City. Because of their influential supporters and contributors, both the Christian Commission and the Sanitary Commission soon had virtually official status. With no organization except her volunteers, personally recruited, and with no financial backing except what she managed to drum up herself, Clara Barton was very much a presence on the battlefield. By the time the Army of the Potomac began moving into Virginia, she had become attached to the 9th Corps. She had accumulated 4 big wagons, all heavily loaded, plus an ambulance. So far as she was concerned, military red tape did not exist. When she could not persuade officials to relax or bend regulations, she blithely went on her own way and ignored them. Always following the troops, she went as far south as Charleston, South Carolina. However, in Edwin McMaster's Stanton of Ohio, she met her match. Fully as stubborn as the little woman who had badgered him for weeks, and himself destined to be the focus of impeachment charges against a president, the U.S. Secretary of War knew all also thought that she was an infernal nuisance, competing with infrequently challenging the work of the Sanitary Commission and the Christian Commission. So Stanton refused to give her passes to move at her own discretion among the troops, as she demanded. Only when news of the casualties in the wilderness reached Washington did he relent temporarily. Unable to topple the male establishment that controlled not only the war but also the care of sick and wounded, Clara Barton found a new focus for her effort. She turned to the neglected cases of men who had once been members of federal units but who had simply disappeared. Long before the label MIA was fashioned, she was busy trying to locate and identify the missing. In post-war years, her Bureau of Records closed the cases of thousands of men, including many who died at Andersonville Prison. Once she and her workers had found as many graves as possible and had identified men buried in them, Clara Barton turned her energy overseas. While active in relief work during the Franco-Prussian War, she learned about activities of the fledgling International Red Cross organization.